Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Secure Talk. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I'll be your host for this episode of Secure Talk. Today, we're going to be talking to Mr. Mason Jappa, who is the CEO and co-founder of Blockware Solutions, and we're going to be talking about, what Blockware Solutions does, and how it helps people who are, out there mining cryptocurrencies, some of the security concerns related to cryptocurrency and cryptocurrency mining, and probably some other things as well. But first off, let's welcome Mason. Mason, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me on, Mark. I think we're going to have a lot of things to talk about. It's been a wild last few years, and a day in crypto feels like 6 months in the regular world. So always a range of topics that we can talk about.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things I like to talk to people about is how do you keep abreast of all the latest developments, because there's so many different things going on. So what do you do? How do you, know what's going on and what's relevant and which way to go?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think for me, it's a lot of reading. I usually read about um, news in blockchain or news in mining, and I do a lot of charting. And usually I do that in the mornings and at nights, because during the days, we can get busy and have meetings and be texting and talking. So when it's quiet, I like to catch up. And then I also, and I get a lot of good information from, the different people that I follow on news mediums like Twitter and Discord channels and people that I talk to daily. So I think it's just important to build that daily regimen, because things can change very fast in this world. So you need to be on top of it, especially when you're operating at a high level.
Yeah, I mean, if you're leading a company, you have all that day-to-day operational thing, but you still need to be understanding what's going on in the, the industry as a whole. What's the competitive landscape look like, and what's your vision for the company based upon the signal you're receiving. So it's a big challenge. But before we go too far into that, maybe you can just step back a little bit and explain, how did you get involved with blockchain and the creation of Blockware Solutions?
Yeah, no, that's great. I think it's always nice to look back into memory lane. So for me, I was always passionate about technology. Went to school Indiana University, College School of Business, got a degree in finance and accounting, almost became an investment banker, had investment banking interviews and offers, but then I looked at myself in the mirror and decided that I wanted to work in technology. So I decided to decline those offers and get a master's degree in information systems. And that around that time, it was in 2013, I discovered Bitcoin, and that was at the same time I kind of pivoted into information systems and information security and technology. So it all kind of connected to me from at that point. And then I knew I eventually wanted to work in cryptography or in blockchain, or help build on Bitcoin and help build the narrative around it. So around 2015, I was management consulting. My family came from a manufacturing background, mainly wood manufacturing. So we had a setup of having a warehouse of space, some excess energy, and that's kind of the perfect outlet for mining cryptocurrency, right? So I set up some Ethereum graphic card miners and started buying Bitcoin miners and just built my own small operation. And through doing so, and actually building my own small operation, I saw a lot of fragmentation in just the sourcing of that equipment, and I saw really a lack of transparency and trust in that marketplace, and I saw a lot of risk as well. Back when if you were to order mining rigs, in 2016, even 2017, um, there were just a few manufacturers. You'd have to pay them in cryptocurrency, so in Bitcoin or Ethereum or Bitcoin Cash, for example. And a lot of time the batches would drop and sell out in minutes. And usually it'd be on Hong Kong time or China time. So it would be at like 4 a.m. You'd have to stay up all night, hope that you could secure some machines. And you also took on currency risk, right? Because we're trading a volatile asset. And if they're only taking on Bitcoin as payment, if Bitcoin went down in 30% of value while you were waiting to place an order, you lost 30% of the machines you'd like to order. So that's when I decided to found Blockware Solutions, which I did in 2017. strictly originally just wanted to be a hardware sourcing company. And we wanted to be a trusted and transparent entity that people could order mining hardware from. And our goal was to bring hash rate or computational power for Bitcoin to the United States and just be a trusted partner in the ecosystem. And it turned out that we started the company at a very right time. And we also wanted to decentralize the network, right? If you're thinking back in 2017, a lot of the Bitcoin mining network was in China, maybe 90%. And I would say in the United States, representatively at that time, there was like 0.2% of the Bitcoin mining network was mining in the United States. So there's been a huge shift, and we can talk about that more. But that was the start. And then over the years, I wanted to verticalize, right, and become a vertically integrated company. And so once you buy a mining rig, then you need a place to host it, right? And data center hosting is too expensive. So you need tier 0 or lean and mean data centers, like warehouses with air or CFM cooling instead of air conditioning. And then you need a lot of different high powered infrastructure to do so. And you need low cost energy because that's 90% of the cost. You have to worry about politics so you don't get banned from mining in your state or country, which we've seen historically happen in China. We've seen it happen in certain states. And we see it taking a front hold with regulatory policy in the United States. And then you need technicians, et cetera. So we started to set up hosting facilities. You need mining software. You need experienced technicians to be able to repair and reboot. And so over the years, since 2017, we've really developed that solution. And what we're trying to do is make mining easy for the masses of the people. And with that, I believe we have proven that to become true. And since I founded the company, now we have about 40% and climbing of Bitcoin mining hash rate in the United States. So it's been a magnificent story, and I think our company certainly played a part in pushing out that narrative and moving mining here.
Though that's several really impressive data points there, and an impressive evolution of the company. I got to ask. I mean, I'm going to go back to the beginning, and then we'll get into more what you're doing now. But back in 2013, you started to kind of have an interest in cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and I mean, that's kind of when I started looking at it too. And the challenge that I had was I would try to talk to people about it, and everybody thought I was nuts. As late as even maybe 2017, 2018, if I asked, the 10 closest people to me, have you looked at Bitcoin? They all looked at me like, dude, just forget about it, man. No way, It's like, so I got to ask, because, you're talking about 2013. At what point did you, convince or became convinced that, hey, you know what, this is something that's really happening? And how were you able to kind of reach out and connect with other like-minded people back then?
Wow, great questions. So I think there's catalyst events that took place that really took Bitcoin to the next level. And honestly, I think the largest catalyst was the Silk Road. It brought Bitcoin to a global news medium, and it was a payment mechanism for transacting products, regardless, taking the Silk Road, policies, whether you believe in it or any of those narratives. Bitcoin powered the back end payment system, and it proved out to be a successful way to transact, and it proved out to be a private way to transact. Well, not as private as people thought, but the decentralized genesis of Bitcoin itself was fascinating, and the fact that you could pay somebody at any point in time of the day, and you could send millions and billions of dollars over a network with just the click of a button and having that transaction verified. And with the way that blockchain works and Bitcoin works, it's written on a ledger, and the miner is the one that verifies that transaction. That was when I was like, oh my god. And to your point of earlier, man, I agree. A lot of what I've done over my years is try to educate. And that's why we have an entire research arm where we've been writing very detailed research, mainly covering mining, on-chain analysis of different networks, mainly focused on Bitcoin, and then all the equities, the publicly traded equities that have exposure to digital currency, mainly Bitcoin mining equities, but you see new ones coming up. And I think the more I can educate, the more we can get adoption and understanding. And now the institutions are here, and it's easier. But if you're talking in 2013, 2014, 2015, when I founded this company, everyone thought I was crazy. And the first people I talked to, I feel like I just spent so much time trying to just get them to understand the base element of it, and then having to educate them on mining, which is a whole other ball game, was very tough. So winning over our first clients was certainly a challenge. And at the time, I'm 30 now, so I was like 26 when I started this company.
Mm-hmm. Now, so well, let's dig in a little bit. So you mentioned you started creating mining rigs for sale. I mean, tell us a little bit about what is a mining rig. What do you have to do? And if you were in the market, if I were in the market for a mining rig, what should I be looking at?
Yes, and just to clarify, we do not build the machines. We partner with the manufacturers, and then there's a fascinating secondary market where I really think the magic happens. And so the secondary market of P2P transactions. So the largest manufacturers are based in China, and really the two largest are called Bitmain and MicroBT. So we as a company take on large purchase contracts with the manufacturers, and then we distribute what we receive from the manufacturers to our client base, and we resell them, and then we can sell them with hosting, meaning they host the machine with us, or we can just ship it directly to our client base, right? We also buy from the secondary market, and we kind of became market makers in the secondary market, at least for the United States, right? What is the price of the machine? Because these machines, they change in price daily, right? Because their net inflow or the net cash that they generate changes because Bitcoin price changes, by the minute or by the second. Really, it's really interesting. So that marketplace. So one day the price of a machine could be X dollars, and the next day could go up 10% if Bitcoin went up 20% that day or something. Usually, I like to say there's a perfect positive correlation to the price of the machines and Bitcoin in this example. And how you order a machine. Well, if you're lucky enough to work directly with the manufacturer, then that's a great way to do it. But because the manufacturers, have changed in policy, Joe from Kansas who's trying to invest $50,000, the manufacturers aren't going to work with them directly, right? It'd be like in an AI world, it'd be like asking Tesla to ship them $50,000 worth of their proprietary chips that they use in their vehicles. It doesn't work. So that's why companies like us exist. It gives Joe from Kansas a chance to participate, and so they can buy the machines from us, and we can control the entire process and make it easy. So I think that's why it's essential for there to be service providers, because it allows people to participate, and ultimately, the more decentralized the network is, the better. And as you see all these large miners that pop up, the publicly traded miners, the Rights, the Marathons, the bit farms, and the large orders they place, you get worries of centralization. But I think entities like us, continue to decentralize because we're spreading it out into the masses, and that's really an important foundation, fundamental piece of what Bitcoin is and what it's meant to be.
So if I was Joe and I had $50,000, what should I look for, and what would I actually get, and what could be my expected ROI on whatever it is that I'm purchasing?
Yeah, great questions, and I didn't think I answered. So what is a mining rig? Let me reverse. Think of it like a high-powered server, right? But it's a purpose-built server. So inside of a server, you have silicon chips or graphic cards, right? If you're doing alternative currency mining, and then you have a power supply and a motherboard and
Can I just one question before you go down there? Like how much coin specific or currency specific attributes are there for the different rigs? Are they? Yeah. Can I go and use one size fits all, or do I need to be very specific in terms of what I'm looking for?
That's a great question. So to mine Bitcoin, it's the largest network and it's the most difficult to mine. It's the most competitive. So you have to buy what's called an ASIC. It's a high powered purpose built machine that can only mine Bitcoin's algorithm. So if you wanted to mine Bitcoin, you have to buy that specific Bitcoin mining ASIC to be competitive. And you need, you typically you want to buy the latest and the greatest, and you want to keep up with the technology upgrades that take place. And usually I see, three ASIC or server upgrades in the Bitcoin world. Three major upgrades happen every 5 years or so. But on the flip side, there's thousands of cryptocurrencies, right? And then you get into other discussions. There's proof of work, meaning you have to have a server and you need physical energy, and you're plugging in a machine to mine the currency. And there's proof of stake, which does not require any energy, and it requires nodes and host. There's still servers that power proof of stake, but they're not energy intensive servers. They're nodes that are just talking to each other, and that's the way that they validate blocks. And that's a whole other discussion.
So one is you're actually mining the currency. The other one is you're kind of supporting the blockchain, the network.
Correct. Yeah. So proof of stake is a design for an example of a token that's migrating there is Ethereum. But prior proof of stake, is across different a lot of different cryptocurrencies, and so you don't need a physical server to mine it. Instead, you can stake to multiply your yield, or you can just buy the token. Or if you want to become the version of a miner of the proof of stake ecosystem, you could set up a validator node or a master node or a staking node. All three of those terms mean the same thing. And then when you do that, you essentially become a miner of that network, right? The validators are the ones that are processing the transactions, and they're the ones that are allowing people to stake their currencies with and get an interest, right? If you deposit your tokens into someone's staking node, you receive an interest. It's like your savings account, right? And the node or validator operator is like the bank. I think of miners like the bank processors of Bitcoin, the Bitcoin ecosystem, right? They're validating transactions. They're proving they're the proof of work.
Wow. Okay. So, again, I'm back to Joe, and I've got my 50K.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It sounds like you share a lot of content. I don't know if you actually give advice, but as much as you feel comfortable advising me, it sounds like Bitcoin is very, very competitive. It's very, very specific. It sounds like some of the there might be more potential upside to go after some of the lesser or the newer coins. I mean, what advice would you give, or what are if you don't even have structured as advice, you could just say what are the pros and cons of looking at let's go for Bitcoin or let's go for some of these newer coins.
No, great question. So, I push people towards Bitcoin. Newer coins on the mining side, if you want to mine, are much riskier, and you have to be very sophisticated to be successful. And that's because at any point in time, it's an extremely competitive marketplace. A different manufacturer could come in and make a better machine, and the machine that you could have bought in just 1 month ago is now worthless. It becomes, my term is a doorstop, right? It can hold my door open, and or I can stub my toe on it. So I push people towards Bitcoin because Bitcoin mining is long term. It's easy. You generate daily yield. It's much less risky, and I really believe in Bitcoin itself long term, right? If you're going to be mining Bitcoin, you're bullish on the ecosystem. Miners are the most bullish participants. They're the ones that think Bitcoin one day will be worth $1 million per token, right? For example. And that's the kind of I don't preach that to clients, and I don't like to give forecasts, but there are, back to your question and what you're trying to get out of me is like, okay, I'm Joe. I have 50 grand. What am I going to do? So I'd say, Joe, you want to buy 5 machines. And right now the latest and greatest are S19s. And 95% of costs associated to miners is, in fact, if you're Joe, 100% of your cost is just your energy cost, right? Because the cost of your energy is all that you're going to be billed for aside from the machine. So there's OPEX, there's CAPEX. Your OPEX is your cost of your energy. Your CAPEX is your investment on the front side of and ownership of the machines itself. So Joe could buy 5 of these S19s from us for roughly $10,000 a piece. At current levels, if I use about a 7-cent energy rate, and I made some adjustments to a couple of things. Joe could probably expect to ROI in about, I would say, 16 months, which is not bad, right? And then from that point on, daily, he would be receiving profit. Now, there's a lot of variables in that, and it can get complex when I'm breaking this down, Mark, right? Because if Bitcoin price doubles, and Joe has been holding on to all that Bitcoin that he mines, all his revenue, then the Bitcoin that he mined now, in 6 months is worth twice the amount than it was, right? And if he held on to that, so I call that your strategy, right? So when I'm talking about forecasting your ROI, your strategy is going to dictate your success. And the miners that accumulate their Bitcoin and believe in Bitcoin going up in value are going to win, because it just creates this hyper accelerating snowball effect of yield, and it can accelerate or hyper accelerate your return on investment. And there's another thing that I think 90% of the Bitcoin mining ecosystem forgets. It's the fact that the 50,000 Joe invests in those 5 machines, those machines aren't going to be worthless in 4 years. They maintain a residual value. So when I send my clients models, and I try to I break it down for them, and I let them you can actually adjust these equations, and it's an Excel model with very we put a lot of time into building this, but you can adjust parameters. But anyways, within those models, you can put in different forecasts, and in the end, your machine's going to have a value. And something fascinating that's taken place over the years is these machines have gone up in value as they've mined. So like the S19, which people are buying still today and still is a new machine, was $3,000, for example, in June of 2020 when it first came out. On the secondary market, I could resell that same S19 for $10,000 now. So if Joe entered in June of 2020, not only did he profit and accumulate all that Bitcoin he mined over the 2 years with his 50 grand, but his machines are worth 3 times what he paid.
Now, is that a factor of the price of Bitcoin, or is that a factor of the shortage of chips, or both, or neither?
Yeah, so I'd say it's really what I think truly prices a machine is 3 factors. It is the price of Bitcoin, the most important, the machine itself, right? Is it still the latest generation? Is it still efficient? Is it still hashing, or does it still have high computational power relative to the market? And then as well, the third would be the scarcity element, right? Because there's a chip shortage. Recently, we saw chip shortage narrative really come to play as it came to the mining world, especially, right? Because Bitmain and MicroBT, like I said, 2 large manufacturers. Now you see Intel entering the game, right? Those companies are ordering their chips from TSMC and Samsung and a couple others, right? But I'd say those are the 2 largest. They're competing with Google and Microsoft and IBM and Tesla and SpaceX for the same allocation of chips. So it's hyper competitive, and there's only a certain amount of output that can take place. So machine scarcity is really important, and I think drives price a lot more than people think. Right now, machines have been a little bit more plentiful because, in my opinion, the largest event in mining took place last year, where China banned mining, right? And at the time when they banned it, it was May of 2021, 65% of the global Bitcoin mining network was in China. So what we saw was a fire sale, and there's still machines that were running in China that are just sitting in boxes waiting for a new home. So scarcity has been a little less of a factor, but now we're 7 months past that. So I think we're almost at the point where all those machines, found a new home or were purchased by somebody else. But prior to that, it was really hard to buy machines, and sometimes you buy 1 year into the future, right? And it's kind of hard for people to stomach putting up capex for a machine that you receive in 1 year. It's a gamble.
Yep. Especially if they're shipping it over from another country, specifically if it's coming from China. So maybe you can talk a little bit about, because you mentioned earlier that a lot of the mining shifted from China to other countries, including the U.S. And what does that look like now in the U.S.? And you mentioned that there are some pushback from some local municipalities and state governments. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and that's, you could talk for days about this, and we will be talking for days. I mean, this is front and center, right? We have
Yeah.
hearings. We have the government trying to understand what is taking place and how to tax it and what law should be passed. And I think both sides need to be heard out, and opinions and discussions should be, listened to and had. So when you migrated the machines from China, where did they go? Well, I'd say a large majority of them went to the United States, right? Because prior to that Chinese Exodus event, I'd say the United States was about 13% of global hash rate. Post Exodus event and where we're at today, I'd say the United States is probably about 45 to 50% of current global hash rate. So, I mean, there's your answer, and then the remaining, 65% was in China. So, right. So where did that stuff go? Well, there's still some underground miners in China, right? Maybe, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10%, it's still there and mining, illegally potentially, right? They also went to, to Kazakhstan and Russia and, any country with the last four letters of Stan, Canada, Venezuela, South America, where miners flock to where there's cheap energy. And now there's a whole narrative around ESG, right? Which is front and center as you talk about the network. And really, the only thing that I think people try to pick on Bitcoin about, right? Saying that we're using dirty energy, which, in theory could be coal power energy, and it's not good for the environment. And this energy should be used elsewhere. We can discuss that, of course. But back to where we're going with policy. So right now, we actually saw some policy come out, or discussions take place where the government may be taking a position on not taxing staking or mining. And that's like fresh news that came out in the last week. And it actually started, I first read about it when there was a gentleman in 2019 who was staking, and he actually tried to sue the federal government, claiming that he shouldn't have to pay taxes on the new coins that he minted, right? And that means that, think of, these Bitcoin itself is property. It's not considered a currency legally. So why would I be taxed on property that I am creating upon creation?
I wonder if there's any kind of parallel, like, for example, if I go out in my backyard and dig up a hunk of gold, to use a real mining example, am I taxed on that? I mean, and on what? On the gain, or how would that work?
Yeah,
right?
it's the same parallel. That's a great. I always love to give the gold mining, parallel. Like they're very similar. Yeah, you go find gold in your backyard. You declare you have in your possession, but you shouldn't pay taxes on the sale. I mean, you shouldn't pay taxes on it until you sell it. And then your net cost, well, in your gold example, right, your net cost is like zero because you found it in your backyard. So you'd have to, depending on what the fair value was and what your tax bracket was, you would pay that percentage based on when you sold it. And that's our argument. We will declare what we mine, we will mark it as revenue, but the property that we are accumulating, we should not be taxed on until we sell it. And so that's where I think there's a lot of discussion. And then the second thing is understanding around, does the government support it, right? And I think it goes down to the state level, and you hit the nail on the head with your question. I think it's a state by state political decision. I'd say the most friendly states in the United States right now are Kentucky. That's where I do most of my mining and set up shop. Texas, which is probably where the largest miners are and has the largest hash rate and a very good energy grid. And then others like Wyoming have been very friendly. I really think those three states are the best. And then West Virginia too, you could sprinkle in. But like Kentucky, for example, has law that has been passed in the House of Representatives and in the Senate that incentivizes miners to mine there. They want us to come mine there. They subsidize the cost of people to work in our mines. They pay for import costs and shipping costs. They defer taxes. They give us subsidized rates on energy. That's amazing.
And
Kentucky's,
is there rationales because you're going to be creating jobs? Because obviously, I mean, the tax thing is, we put that on the shelf for a second because whether it can be taxed or not. But is it just simply the job creation or the facilities purchases or?
yeah. So it's creating. We're actually like revitalizing an economy.
Mhm.
Like, look at Kentucky. I mean, Kentucky was a coal state, for example, or a manufacturing state. A lot of those coal and manufacturing jobs, they're gone, and these areas have been decimated. A lot of these areas had opioid crisis. Like
Well,
you're
you mentioned
in
West Virginia. I mean, that's
same.
yeah, it's just coal, right?
Yeah, it's coal town. So what's cool is you can actually take that infrastructure, right, from those manufacturing coal plants, and you can repurpose it to mine Bitcoin instead. And so you're creating economies, you're creating tax income for the states, you're creating new jobs, and then you're painting nice narratives, and you're giving them benefits. For us, we give health insurance, we give 401k. We pay salaries, that are livable wages, like 60 to 80,000, for example, for a local Kentuckian. We invest into the areas. We promote um, the local communities, and we invest in the communities, and they've embraced that, and you're coming into very poor areas. So it's a really nice story that I don't think it's talked enough about. And the same in some really rural areas of Texas, and yeah, you talked about West Virginia. And then it goes down to, okay, we get that. What about the energy, right? What energy are you using? Are you using coal? Well, no. And the short answer is no. And I think the the best, the most efficient way to mine is pulling from the grid, right? The United States energy grid. And different grids have different allocations of energy, right? Example of a grid that we use is PJM. It's fairly sustainable. There's a small percentage of coal, but it's mostly sustainable energy. It's nuclear, it's hydro, it's wind, it's solar. Close to where we're at in Kentucky, there's 100 megawatt solar farm being built next door to us. That's awesome for us. We're just gonna say, hey, we want to use that energy. So I think miners are very aware of the energy that they're using, and they want it to be sustainable. And actually, and factually, sustainable energy is the cheapest, because as a miner, if you're actually the owning entity of the farm and not Joe, about 90% of our cost associated to mining is on an OPEX side is energy. And the cheapest energy is sustainable energy. So what's the cost of hydro? Well, it's not extremely expensive.
That's
Solar,
that's that's interesting because I mean I've actually done a fair amount of reading on the topic, and one of the big detractors for renewable is that they say the energy density for any of the renewables is extremely low compared to hydrocarbon. And hydroelectric fits somewhere in the middle there. And then and let me put it aside. Nuke power is the most efficient by
yes.
far. Okay, so if you're using nuke power, yeah, it's efficient, it's cheap, but we don't have any nuke plants coming on the grid. Okay, but we do have a ton of a ton of solar, a ton of wind coming on. And you mentioned Texas, and then last year, Texas had an issue, which turns out actually wasn't the wind farm's fault. They initially blamed it on, the wind power, but then they dug into it, and a big portion of their grid had been taken offline for maintenance, so it wasn't even available. And there's some other issues as well. But let me ask you, why are you getting subsidies or something, or why is it cheaper, or is it just it is cheaper?
Yeah, so it just is cheaper.
Okay.
In short, that's the way I've seen, and holding 30-year energy contracts, like, and then you're seeing grids become utilized, and what happens is miners are the perfect complementary providers to the grid. They stabilize the grid, and they allow the source of energy to build out in excess. Because what happens is, I'll give an example. Natural gas, right? There's a debate, like, is natural gas sustainable or is it not? I think it is. So I'm in the camp of natural
Well, it's
gas is
clean.
dead.
It's cleaner than some of the alternatives. That we can definitely agree on that, right?
Yeah, right. So, way better than coal. But natural gas is bad if we're flaring the excess energy. So, but if
Hmm.
you put a mining farm next to a natural gas well, then what happens is instead of flaring that excess energy, we're using it for mining Bitcoin, and we're not putting CO2 or carbon emissions into the environment, right? That's a great example. The same for like a nuclear plant. You also like there needs to be more nuclear plants. I agree with you, but like nuclear plants and massive grids will need to be in more densely populated areas. And you don't want to if you produce, you want to build to the grid itself. So if you have miners setting up shop, all around, the states, they're just complementary to the grid. And they're balancing the grid. They're going to lower the energy rate. They're going to help build out a pretty use case to build out the infrastructure of the future. And what's fascinating is you actually this is in the headlines last week. You saw Windstone and Texas miners curtail their energy, shut off their mines because the Texas grid needed the energy due to outages from a massive storm.
Hmm.
And you see that, right? And then on the curtailment side, that's amazing. And we did our Blockware did that last year too. And when there was a massive storm in 2021 in Kentucky, the energy company called us and was like, hey, would you be willing to redirect your energy so that we can keep the local community's power online? We're like, yes, of course.
Yes. Thank you for
Yeah.
that. Thank you. No. Hey, and I shouldn't be laughing at local communities without power, but I thought it was very nice for them to ask you instead of just flipping the switch and saying, hey, power to the people first. But let me jump tracks here for a second and talk about security because
Yeah.
the theme of our show is secure talk, and there's two issues that I'd like to bring up. One is, you mentioned that the mining rigs are made in China, and I'm assuming that's mainland China and not Taiwan. Is that correct?
So what we've seen actually is a lot of these manufacturers shifting where they manufacture. So we've seen a shift to Indonesia, Malaysia, from China, right? So
Okay.
we've seen a shift to those countries for a lot of different reasons, and it makes a lot of sense. So I'd
Okay.
say either China, Indonesia, or Malaysia right now.
So, and we know that there has been, I mean, both the U.S. government and the Chinese government has at certain times influenced domestic manufacturers to create backdoors and different types of tools that will allow them to kind of keep an eye on certain things. How is a Bitcoin miner or somebody who's buying one of these rigs, is that a concern at all? Do I need to be aware that, how do I know that my machine has not been compromised?
Yeah, it's a great question, and that comes to the trust element. So for us, we're either ordering directly from the manufacturer, new machines, or from trusted sources that we've been working with for many years. And in fact, over the years, I've seen a range of security problems to that exact question. And the Chinese were very sophisticated, and sometimes some people, and I'm not going to name names, I've known that have bought machines over the years. Like the Chinese put in physical implants into those machines,
Hmm.
that physical implants that skimmed revenue automatically, and like one of a colleague I knew like didn't find that physical implant after mining for like a year. And then
Wow.
there's also been physical implants that the machine showed up, and the seller may not have known, right? They didn't test it, but whoever the seller was before them um, made it so that there was malware on there that essentially says if you don't send us, X amount of Bitcoin, then these machines will never be able to operate because it had a physical implant in there that they eventually were able to remove that just turned the machine off every time you try to turn it on. So you need to trust your supply chain and order from trusted channels and networks. And what we do, we try to protect our client base when we get the machines. We're pretty direct manufacturer that we've been using for years. We know the source, we know the commercial invoices. If we see any red flags in the supply chain process, we can catch those. And for us, we've sold over 250,000 mining rigs since 2017. So we've been around the block and certainly have been in all sorts of situations. So we're very careful, but we test the machines when we get them, and we report if there's issues immediately. And we have ways of testing them physically and testing them for seeing if any of the firmware has been changed. We look at those things, and that's important. That's security 101. And then secondly, there's a lot of different providers in this space. If you want to talk about security, you should never work with a provider that controls your Bitcoin, right? You need to control your Bitcoin wallet address, and that's Bitcoin 101. And cold storage is the best and most secure way to secure your Bitcoin or your cryptocurrency, meaning you control the keys, right? With a cold storage wallet, you're the only person in the world that knows either a 24 passphrase to recover or a PIN that you use to enter to access it. And it's offline unless you plug it in to turn it online. And we call it cold storage because usually it's offline and it's stored in a secure place. So if you're working with an entity like an exchange, you're at risk unless that exchange has insurance, et cetera, for you. But even an exchange itself won't insure if you're personally hacked. Like someone steals Mason's phone, on my phone, I have 2 off, 3 off, whatever. If I'm held at gunpoint and someone's like, I know you're in crypto and send me everything you have on exchanges, I would do it. And and that's an issue. But there's ways around that. There's companies like that require multi-authentication, right? Meaning like there's a company called Ledger in this ecosystem. They made a lot of these hardware wallets, but they created an enterprise platform that requires 3 of 5 signatories to send a transaction. So that could protect people in those circumstances. So that's with storage of assets.
Excellent. So one other security related question, the cryptojacking, where you go to a site, you click on something, some code's downloaded on your computer, and now all of a sudden your computer, your device is being used by miners to mine crypto. And you experience a slight degradation in performance. A lot of people aren't even aware that it's happening, but because they have the law of numbers, and if you have hundreds or thousands of devices that are kind of working behind the scenes for you, so the crypto jackers and miners can take advantage of your device. What have you seen? And then based upon what you've seen, what advice would you give?
Yes. So first off, those are real situations, and they were much more prevalent earlier when you could these networks were less difficult to mine. Back in the day, a computer could mine Bitcoin, for example. It wasn't that difficult. But there's alternative currencies where that CPU power is profitable. So you just want to be, first off, super careful of websites and clicking on links. My employees recently, were getting emails from me, but it wasn't me. To do tasks or click on links. You need to have filters in whatever email platforms that you use. That's the easiest. That's what I see the most common attacks happen in crypto. It's email and even text. Your numbers get published, and you need to be careful. I use like Nomo Robo for my phone that filters out phone calls and texts and stuff for me, and that helps me, right? But really, just don't click on links and don't download files unless you really trust the third party that you're utilizing. You can mitigate 95% or more of your risk just by ensuring that you trust the third party that you're working with and going through excess diligence to ensure that www.whatever.com, what you're trying to actually download, is the right site. And what happens is there's 10 million scammers out there, unfortunately, in all different ecosystems, not in just crypto, that are really good and becoming super sophisticated at mimicking services. And as it relates to cryptocurrency, if a hacker does have access to your machine and you're sending a transaction, they could actually paste in a different wallet address and right as you're sending something, and then you authorize the sending, and
Mm.
boom, it's gone, right? So you just have to be careful, and there's no defined answer. But for me, and what I tell my employees and people I work with, it's just be very careful with third parties and files and vendors and any external party that you work with in this ecosystem more than others, because there's tons of hacks and hackers that go after cryptocurrency because it's digital currency, right? And it's not insured, and there's a lot of unsophisticated users, unfortunately, in the ecosystem.
Well, I mean, you've touched on this several times. It's really important to work with a company that you trust. They're well established, they're well known, they have a good reputation, and then follow best practices. Hey, Mason, this has been like a really fascinating conversation, and as you alluded to before, we could probably talk for days about any one of these topics. What would you like to share about what Blockware is going to be doing? Blockware Solutions is going to be doing in 2022.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Mark. So we're really, right now we're really growing our company. So we're growing our foothold in the hosting space, and we're growing our foothold in the mining space, and we want to grow more hash power in the state. So reach out to us if you want to mine Bitcoin with us. We'll host a machine for you. We have software. We've made this very easy for people to mine, and we'll do all the hard work for you. You control all the Bitcoin that's mined directly to you as your revenue, and you get monthly easily billing. And then on the media side, we're pushing out a lot of research and information for free. So we have a newsletter, we have a weekly podcast. You just go to blockwareintelligence.com, and then the podcast itself is Blockware Intelligence on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Definitely tune into our weekly sessions. We've had some really good guests on and really good guests scheduled to come on, and that's how you can stay up to date in the market and with some of the services that we offer. And then for us as well, on our roadmap, we're building software. We view ourselves like an early stage, like Oracle type of, we started in hardware, but we're moving into software. So we're building some really cool software in the mining space and outside of the mining space that I think is interesting. And one other area we're focused on to grow this year is staking. So we're offering institutional staking for entities. So reach out to us if you have interest in staking currencies. We enable that for users, and I think it's really integral to have trusted stakers in this ecosystem, and that's where we're inserting ourselves as a trusted staker.
Awesome. And I'll put links to the podcast, your newsletter, your website, all in the show notes. Hey, Mason, I really enjoyed talking to you, and have a great 2022, man.
Thanks, Mark.
Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.